Mic is good? We're good? Okay. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. If I could just ask of you to put your cell phones on vibrate, we would appreciate it very much. Thank you. And welcome to everybody. Bruchos habayis b'shem Hashem. Junior, we're good? Okay, thank you. There's coffee and tea if anybody wants in the corner. Make yourselves comfortable. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, sha'akol niyeh b'dvareh. There's an old anecdote about a Jew, an American Jew, who was visiting the former Soviet Union. And he meets there a Russian Jew, and the Russian Jew says, "Hey, welcome from America, welcome to Russia. Tell me, how is life in the United States of America?" And the Jew says, "Thank God, life is good. How is life in the Soviet Union?" And the Russian replies, "Here life is also good, but we don't say here, thank God. Life is good, it's the Soviet Union." She says, "What do you say?" "We say life is good, thank Khrushchev." So the Jew says, "And what will you say when Khrushchev dies?" He says, "Then we'll say thank God." I share this anecdote with you because of a very fascinating Rashi in the opening of Parshas Maseh. The beginning of Parshas Maseh, which is the last portion of Sefer Bamidbar, the last portion of the book of Numbers, begins with the words, "Eila Maseh b'nei Yisrael, asher yatzu me'eretz Mitzrayim l'tzivoisam b'yad Moshe v'Aaron." This is an account of all of the journeys of the children of Israel, the Jewish people, who left the land of Egypt. Vayichtav Moshe es motza'ayim l'masayim. And Moshe took the time to transcribe every single one of these journeys. And the Torah goes on to recount the 42, what are known as the Membeis Masa'is, the 42 journeys that the Jewish people took en route from Egypt until they arrived at the borders of the promised land, the land of Canaan. And he begins, Vayisu, the first journey was from a place called Ramses, which is in Egypt. They traveled from Ramses, and this is on the 15th day of the first month, on what we call Pesach, or as the Torah calls it, Mimacharas HaPesach, a day after they offered the Passover offering. They left Ramses on the 15th day of Nisan, which we call today the first day of Pesach, Biyad Rama, with an uplifted hand before all of the Egyptians. So the first journey is they leave Ramses, which is a city, a location, a region within Egypt. This is their first journey, and they arrive in a place called Sukkos. This would be their first destination out of Egypt. There's a place called Sukkos. They leave Sukkos, and they arrive in a place called Esam. They leave Esam, and they arrive in a place that is called Pi Hachiros. It's at Pi Hachiros that they suddenly observe the Egyptian troops pursuing them, and in front of them is the Red Sea, the Yam Suf, or the Sea of Reeds, which they will ultimately cross and travel to a new place called Marah. And so Moshe Rabbeinu continues to literally give an account of every single destination. They left Mara and they came to Elima. They left Elima and they came Yamsuf. They left Yamsuf. They came to Midbar Sin. They came to Dafka, Alush, Refidim, Midbar Sinai, Kivros Hataiva, and so on and so forth, all the way down, all the way 40 years until they come to the last destination, which is called Arvos Moav, the plains of Moav, right close to the Jordan River, which they will ultimately cross and enter into the promised land on the other side of the Jordan River. What's the point of this whole recounting? When we look at it, it's names of places. They left here and they came here. They left here and they came here. They journeyed from here and they rested here. They journeyed from here and they rested here. They departed from here and they dwelled here. What is the point? So Rashi asks this question, Lama nichtavu hamasoyis halalu? Is it just for the sake of history to tell you every single place where they spent time during the 40 years in the wilderness? Or is there another purpose? So Rashi brings two interpretations. First interpretation he brings is that one should not get a wrong impression about what happened during these 40 years. You would think that spending 40 years in the desert, they were always on the move. They were constantly relocating, moving their tents and the sanctuary and their families and their children, and they did not have a day of serenity. He says that's the purpose, the first purpose of this recounting that Moshe Rabbeinu does. It gives us perspective, because when you read them, you see that all in all, there are 42 places where they spend their time during these 40 years. But the first 14 of those places happen very close to their departure from Egypt, all the way back in the beginning, the first year after the exodus of Egypt, the first 14 of those. Then the last 8 happen after the death of Aaron in the last months before they were to enter into the land of Israel. So if you take off the first 14 from the beginning and the 8 from the last few months, so it means that for 38 years, they basically were in, as Rashi puts it, in 28 places. For 38 years, they were in 28 places, which means that they weren't running around constantly, that relatively this was a period of much serenity and tranquility. This he quotes from a man named Reb Moshe Hadarshan. But then Rashi says, Reb Tanchuma darash boy drasha acheres. Rabbi Tanchuma gave another perspective on all of this. And Rashi gives now another interpretation, and I'm going to quote, Mashal. This can be explained through a metaphor, through a parable. L'melech shahaya b'nai chayla. There was a king, and his son fell ill. And the king wanted to heal the child, so he took him to a remote location in order to find a refuah, to find a remedy for this child. The child went, and he was healed. Now it's time to go back home. They left home to go find a place or a doctor or a physician where the child can find a remedy to his illness, and now they're going home. Kivon shahayu chayzrin, as they're returning home, so that they're returning home, they're going the same path with which they went to the place of healing. Now they're going back. So kivon shahayu chayzrin, as they're returning, his chil aviv moina kol hamasoyos. His father starts recounting and enumerating all of the places they stopped. It was a far journey, l'makam rachak. He took him to a far place. Obviously, they didn't just go straight. They had to stop in different locations. And the father pointed out, kol hamasoyos, the entire journey, every destination that they passed on the way to the doctor, he now points out on the way back from the doctor back home. Amar loy, his father says to him, kan yashananu, here we slept. Kan hoikarnu. Here we cooled off. Hoikarnu comes from the word kar, which means we cooled off. You could say, here you got a cold, or here we cooled off. We had a water fight, or we went swimming, or we went bathing, or we went into cold water. However, here we got cold. Here we got cold. Kan chashashta es roishcha. And here you got a headache. Here your head started to cause you pain or migraines or chashashta es roishcha. You were feeling pain in your head. V'chuli, etc. Indeed, Rashi says, this is Rabbi Tanchuma's take on the purpose of this entire account, just like in the metaphor. As the king is going back home with his prince, he points out and he says, hey, you remember this place? And you remember what happened in this place? And you remember what happened in this place? And you remember what happened in this place? Here we slept. Here we cooled off. Here you had a headache. This is what Moshe Rabbeinu is doing. V'chuli. This is what Rashi quotes from the Medrash. And as the Medrash Tanchuma concludes and says, Hashem says to Moshe, I want you to recount for them all the places where it was that they disturbed me, that they caused me pain, that they caused me grief, that hichisuni, they angered me. This Medrash and Rashi basically compare Hashem's instruction to Moshe to record all of the 42 stations of the nation's journey from Egypt all the way to the borders of Eretz Yisrael, the land of Canaan. So it's similar to the story of that king. The king was also traveling with his child. Why? Looking for a cure for an illness, for the illness of the child. But it's time to go home. So they passed through every station where they originally stopped. And he's always reminding his child what happened at every destination. This is what Moshe is doing here in the name of God. Let's go back to every destination and remember what happened. But when we think about the parable and the metaphor, there are quite a few questions that come to mind. First of all, in the parable, the father and the boy are on their way home. They're going back home. On the way home, he points out all of the interesting experiences that they endured on their journey. What's the purpose of it? Nostalgia, human interest, appreciation, gratitude, memory. Perhaps the father wants to point out how much stress there was, how much they had to endure, how much they had to overcome. Whatever the reason for recounting, going down what we call memory lane and remembering what happened in the past. What was the objective, though, here? What's the objective of Hashem telling Moshe, I need them to remember all the places where they were? The metaphor is an interesting metaphor. How does it answer the question? Particularly, the metaphor is about a child who was ill, and he was being taken to be cured. Apparently, this is a metaphor for the Jewish people who were struggling, and their father, God, was taking them to be healed. And as they come back, he points out all of the things that happen in the different places. But in the metaphor, he points out three things. Here we slept, here we cooled off, or here you got a cold, and here you had a headache. Why these three examples? What is the significance of this? How do they match the experiences of the Jewish people during their journey in the desert? In fact, these three examples seem strange. Here we slept. Well, yeah, usually you have to sleep somewhere. Sleep is part of human life. Doesn't seem like a very dramatic development. You have to go to sleep. A headache is not uncommon. People get headaches, especially when they're traveling. And during a hike in a desert, we all want to cool off once in a while. We want to hydrate ourselves. either through quenching our thirst with water or bathing, etc., swimming and so forth. So why from all of the examples does the Medrash and Rashi choose these three things? Here we slept, here we cooled off, and here you got a headache. It's also interesting, the first two are plural, inclusive. The third one is exclusive. The first one is we slept, we both slept. The second one is haikarnu, we cooled off, we both cooled off, or we both got a cold. And the third one is kan chashashta es roishcha, your head started to hurt, your head became faint, you got a headache. The third one, suddenly there is a barrier between the father and the child, between the king and the prince. Besides, the metaphor doesn't really reflect the story. In the metaphor, they're coming home. They're returning in the same route in which they traveled. They're basically retracing their steps backward. So all the locations where they experienced different occurrences on the way there, they're now hitting those same spots on the way back. But here, it's a completely different story. Thank God they weren't tracing back their steps. They've been here 40 years. They're on the way to the promised land. They're not returning back to Egypt. They're not physically revisiting all of their encampments in the desert. So it seems like a strange metaphor. Like the father is going back and he says, here this happened, here this happened, here this happened. But they weren't going back. What then is the meaning of this parable? You would also think, to emphasize the question, one question again, you would also think, you want to bring out here, nostalgia, you usually talk about unique things, dramatic things. The fact, when you go back memory lane and you say, you remember 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 10 years ago, you remember 20 years ago we went to sleep. Every night we go to sleep. Or you had a headache. I mean, we have headaches. Or you cooled off, you took a cold cup of water. I mean, yeah, when it's a hot day, you want a cold cup of water. The examples you would think would be a little more intriguing or interesting or dramatic, something that's worth mentioning because it's unique, it's out of the ordinary. It's like, you remember what happened here. Sleeping happens everywhere. Headaches can happen anywhere. Cooling yourself off can happen anywhere. Yet it's these three metaphors that are given. On a literal level, on a pshat level, one can perhaps say, as is explained in some places, that this metaphor is recounting what happened during the first three journeys. And it would be very interesting of how meticulous it is. In Torah, things are meticulous. You don't just give a metaphor to give some interesting story. The metaphor, the parable, has to reflect the message. If the Medrash chooses these three examples and Rashi quotes them, it's because these three examples are precise. But it's not the only three things you do on a journey. Besides them not being very dramatic, it's not the only three things you do on a journey. Going to sleep, cooling yourself off, and getting a headache. There are also other things that happen on a journey, but these are mentioned. But if you study the first three journeys, you'll see that these three things happened. Because during the first three journeys, the first journey was from Ramses. They left Egypt on the day of Pesach. On the 15th day of Nisan, in the middle of the day, they left Ramses. And it says, Vayachanu b'Sukkos. They dwelled in a place, Sukkos. This is the evening of the first day Pesach, what we would call Moitzai, the first day of Pesach. They come to Sukkos, and what did they do there? They went to sleep. They went to sleep. So the first thing that happened was, God says, we went to sleep. They leave Sukkos. They now got up. They're now in their new location, Sukkos, and they leave Sukkos. They go to the next journey. And what happens here? At this point, for the first time, they become surrounded by the Ananei HaKavod, by the clouds of glory. As the Targum Yonasan ben Uziel says, in Sukkos, and as they left Sukkos, they were surrounded by the Ananei HaKavod, because the first journey, it says, Ve'esa eschem al kanfei nesharim, I carried you like on the wings of eagles. There was no Ananei HaKavod. But now there are the clouds of glory. What was the point of the clouds of glory that encircled the Jewish people throughout the years in the desert? One of the reasons is, our sages say, L'bal yaka behem sherev v'shemesh. The scorching heat of the Sinai desert can really cause tremendous fatalities or certainly risks. And the clouds cast a shade. It literally cooled them off. So the second journey from Sukkos to Esam is Kanhoi Karnu. Here we were cooled off together by the clouds of glory. What happens in the third place? They left Sukkos and they come to a place called, they left Ramses and they come to Sukkos, right? And they sleep in Sukkos. And then they leave Sukkos and Vayisu mi Sukkos, Vayachenu be'Esam. They come to Esam. And this is where, as I said, this journey, the clouds of glory protect them. So here we're cooled off. What happens by the third journey? The third journey is they leave Esam and they come to a place called Pi Hachiros. And this is the first time where they stage what would seem like an intellectual rebellion against Moshe. As they see the Egyptian troops pursuing them, which happens right here at Pi Hachiros. Ramses, Sukkos, they left Ramses. Sukkos is the first place. That's where they sleep. Esam is the second place. That's the journey where they experience the clouds. Pi Hachiros is the third place. And this is where the troops of the Egyptians are pursuing them. 600, Sheish Meyes Rechev Bachor. Pare gets the best, the choicest of his chariots and his troops, and they're stuck. And they turn to Moshe in those famous words and they tell him, first intellectual rebellion. Toiv lanu avoid Mitzrayim mimusenu bamidbar. Isn't it much more logical to be slaves in Egypt than to die in a desert? For the first time, he says, your mind is playing games with you. You have a spiritual confusion. Your head is fate. Chashashnu es chashashtes roishcha. Here, suddenly, your mind is playing intellectual games with you. This is a mistake. This is ridiculous. This is stupid. This is devastating. At least in Egypt, we were slaves, but we were alive. Here, we're all going to die a miserable death right here in the desert as the Egyptians pursue us. Either we drown in the sea or they kill us here. This does not make sense. These are the first three journeys before Kriyas Yamsuf, before the splitting of the Red Sea. That's on one level, on a literal level, you could say why these three examples are quoted as they go back in memory lane and recount all of the experiences from the beginning. But yet, he's not only recounting the first three scenes, he's recounting here all the 42. So obviously, this represents something that is connected to the entire journey, all the way from Egypt, all the way to the Promised Land. Now, when the Jewish people left Exodus, it represents the birth of a nation. Yecheskel Lamed Zayin, Ezekiel 37 compares the Exodus of Egypt to a birth. Literally, you were extracted. Lakachas loigoy mikerev goy. Like God says, I extracted you from the womb of the Egyptians to become independent. When a child is born, relative to obviously pregnancy, it's not completely independent, but there is a new entity, a Metzias Chadash, a new entity. The Jewish people, the day of Yetzias Mitzrayim, were born. And the birth continues throughout this journey until they would enter into Eretz Yisrael, which would be the attainment of their national and spiritual maturity and identity. And in between their birth and fulfilling their goal of entering into the land, there is a 40-year journey through what Moshe Rabbeinu would call Midbar HaGadol V'Hanoira, a grand and fearsome desert. Makaim Nachash V'Akra V'Sara V'Tzimoin Asher Ein Shamayim, a fearful desert filled with venomous snakes, scorpions, and thirst, dehydration because of the absence of water. The journey has 42 stations. Some were long, some were short, some were filled with sublime revelation, and some were filled with strife and contention. Which brings us to the next question, and that is, the king is mentioning, it seems, the issues that happen on the journey. Is it good things or bad things? God tells Moshe, recount all the times that they got me angry. What's wrong with going to sleep? That's not a bad thing. And in every place they got Hashem angry. There were some places where there was contention, where there was strife. Every place they got him angry. Why are you counting all the places? And again, the parable is about sleep. Sleep is not a negative thing. You have to sleep. There's a sefer called Degel Machane Ephraim that was written by a grandson of the Baal Shem Tov. His name was Reb Moshe Chaim Ephraim of Sedlikov. He's buried in Mezhebush in the Ukraine, near his grandfather, the Baal Shem Tov. And he has a book on Chumash called Degel Machane Ephraim. Rabbeinu Moshe Chaim Ephraim of Sedlikov, a city called Sedlikov in the Ukraine. And he has this work. And in Parshas Maseh, he quotes something that he heard from his grandfather, the Baal Shem Tov. And he said that the Baal Shem Tov said that the 42 encampments that Moshe Rabbeinu describes are a mirror of every person's life. Every person, as he puts it, miyoim hivoldoi, ad shuvoy el afrei, from the day of a person's birth until the day of a person's passing, when the person goes back to their source, they go through journeys. And in each life you have these 42 journeys. And when you go through the names of each place, Ramses, Sukkos, Esam, Pihachiros, Mara, Dafka, Alush, Midbar Sin, Kivras Hataiva, Chatzeris, all the 42 places. Each one has a name. Each one has a theme. Every person goes through these 42 journeys. Of course, no two lives are the same. Every person goes through these journeys in their own way, in their own unique, just like any two people driving on the highway, they may be on the same highway. But what's happening in the car is a completely different experience. In your car, you're listening to one thing, and somebody else is listening to something else. This one is in this world, this one is in that world. We could both be on the same road, but it's completely different experiences. Wherever people are, right here in this room, there are many people sitting here, but every person is here as an individual, besides as a collective, in the sense that two people could be sitting in the same room, but their thoughts are completely different. They could be sitting on the same couch. They could be sitting around the same table. Physically, they're around the same table. Emotionally, they're not in the same space. The Baal Shem Tov said, "B'makom shemachshavta shel adam sham hu nimtza." Where your thoughts are, that's where you are. So even though our lives are so different, our journeys are so different, but the common denominator is that every person throughout their life will hit each one of these spots. Every one of these membeis masayos you encounter in your life in one way or another. The reason he was telling this to us is because that's why the Torah recounts it, not just as a story of the past, but as a contemporary story. Why is it important to know? Because when you become conscious of it, when you become conscious where you are, you can look at it from a deeper perspective, and you can maximize the potentials in a far profounder way. The first journey leaves Mitzrayim. The end is right before Eretz Yisrael. The word Mitzrayim means narrow pathways. We all leave Mitzrayim. We all leave the narrow pathway that God opens up in our mothers for the fetus, for the baby to come out. It's Mitzrayim. It's narrow. I don't have to explain it to the people sitting in this room. I'm not giving a men's shiur here. But it's Mitzrayim. It's narrow. It's difficult. It's painful. It's challenging. It's not easy to come out from such a narrow path. And it's one of the great miracles that God created in living organisms, in biology. And that miracle we call the miracle of childbirth. Essentially, it's a Yetzias Mitzrayim. That baby emerges. It's even hard to believe. And suddenly, you're looking at a living person, a living boy, a living girl, hopefully crying a little bit. And you hold that baby for the first time in your arms, exhausted, heavily exhausted, and yet seeing that miracle, that little miracle or big miracle of Yetzias Mitzrayim. And you say, wow, you were in me, and here you are. That is a Yetzias Mitzrayim. You came out of a meitzar. Literally, the word meitzar means narrow straits. That's what the word Mitzrayim means. Meitzarim agvulim, narrow straits. And then the child begins a journey. And that journey goes on, hopefully, for many, many decades. And it's a journey through a desert. It's a journey through life. And life is filled with many different experiences, many different encounters, many different obstacles, setback, challenges, gifts, resources, blessings, failure, and successes. but it's a journey. It's a journey from birth through maturity, through adulthood. And as we continue this journey, we have to remember that it's a midbar hagadol v'hanoira. Sometimes you're facing a very big desert, a fearful desert, a noira, an awesome desert. Sometimes a place with scorpions, with snakes, a place of thirst where you're looking for water, a place of physical or spiritual or emotional dangers. Sometimes a person's soul is thirsty for something, and it's tzimoyin. There's a yearning, there's a thirst. In the end, however, the journey takes you to the borders of your own promised land. Arvas moya v'shayadin yereche, the border of your own promised land. This, the Baal Shem Tov said, are the 42 stations in every person's life. The kunst is to figure out which station you are presently, which station you find yourself in presently. This is how we have to understand the deeper concept of the metaphor, the parable that our sages are giving us here, quoted by Rashi in the beginning of Maseh. The king and the prince are indeed returning. They're going back. They went to find healing, and now they're literally traveling back home, and they're retracing their steps using the same route that they took initially. And in every location he says, you remember this? You remember this? You remember this motel? You remember this inn? You remember this hotel? You remember this picnic table? You remember this waterfall? You remember this lake? Literally in their hike back, the king reminds him every step of the way because they're physically returning. And we asked here, that's not happening. They're not physically returning to these locations. But what happens is as follows. On the eve of their entry into their promised land, on the eve, moments before they would enter into their land flowing with milk and honey, Eretz Canaan, they were able to also retrace their steps. They were able to return, not geographically return, physically go back to every encampment. That didn't happen. They didn't want that to happen. It took 40 years to get it. They were not about to go back. But they were able to look back at their 42 encampments and re-experience them from a different vantage point. Look at them from a different perspective. Not as a people venturing from Egyptian slavery towards an unknown goal through a fearful wilderness, but as a people who, having attained their goal, could now appreciate how each part of the journey was indispensable to their growth and to their identity for them to be able to become the people that they are today. When we are journeying through life, in that original journey, it's hard for us to appreciate the meaning of every journey. It's almost impossible. Unless you're emotionally detached, numb, or lifeless, it's very hard to be able to see the full meaning of every part of your journey of life. Because when you're in the journey, you have to travel in the journey. And when you're experiencing that journey, it's hard to look at it objectively from a detached place. And one can't, one should not. As we fight our way through the desert, as we're trailblazing our path, and everybody is trailblazing the path. And it's not always the beaten track, because every person is unique and individual. And every person has their own challenges and their own opportunities and gifts and their own circumstances to face. So in many ways, you're alone in a positive sense. Vayivaser Yaakov levadai. Yaakov remains alone in his battles. And the idea is that in everybody's battle in the middle of the night, you're alone, you're levadai. Not because you have no friends or support. You may have good friends and support, hopefully. But because there's a nakuda, there's a point in your life where you're alone. Nobody knows you like you know you. It's basically you, it's your core, it's your heart, it's your soul. As much as I know you, as much as other people know you, as much as close people know you, but there's a point in you that is uniquely you. It's uniquely you. And therefore there's an element of levadai. Vayivaser Yaakov levadai. Chayav Adam loymar b'shvili nivra ha'olam. Chazal tell us in Sanhedrin 37. Person has to say the world was created because of me. Does it mean because of me? It means that there's something at stake in your existence. You have something to contribute that nobody else could. It's a unique journey. And as you're trailblazing through that journey, and there are so many challenges. So when I am trailblazing, when I am traveling through that journey, when I'm fighting through it, that's what I'm doing. But now, when they come to the borders of the promised land, similar with every individual, there comes a point in life where you can look back and you can see that the challenges that you had were opportunities that paved rather than impeded your advance through the desert. While you're traveling, it's very hard to see. But the pitfalls and the obstacles, when we first experience them, are pitfalls and obstacles. But one day you could revisit them and see them as rungs on a ladder that elevated you to the place where you're supposed to become. They tell the story about that, and it's one of these old stories about a fellow who had 4 sons. And he wanted his sons to learn not to judge things so quickly, to be able to stand back and see, the bigger picture. So he sent them out on a quest to go and look at a pear tree. A tree growing pears, but it was a tree that grew a distance, far distance from their home. The first son went in the winter to look at the pear tree. The second son in the spring. The third went in the summer, and the youngest boy traveled in the fall. They left, and they all came back, and Tati called all the 4 boys together to describe what they saw. The first boy, who went out in the winter to look at the pear tree, tells his father, a tree, it was ugly, bent, twisted. Okay? The second child, who went in the spring, says, what are you talking about? It was covered with green buds. It was full of promise and potential. You could see that a new life is on the horizon. And then the third child says, I don't know what you're talking about. It was laden with blossoms. They smelled so sweet. They looked so beautiful. It was one of the most graceful trees he has ever seen. And the last child disagreed with all of them. He said it was ripe, filled with fruits that were delicious. They tasted great, and they were a great comfort to his taste buds and his abdomen. And the father looks and says, you were all right. You were all 100% right, because you all saw one season of the tree's life. You can't judge a tree or a person or anything by one season. And you can't see that as the essence of who this person is. And deeper pleasure, deeper love, deeper joy comes from a life that appreciates all of the seasons. And that's why there's something fascinating in Judaism that on Sukkot, Hashem says, take 4 species. Usmachtem lefnei Hashem Elokechem, rejoice with them for 7 days. And the first is Pri Eitz Hadar, a beautiful fruit, which is an esrog. But the Torah doesn't say esrog. The Torah says Pri Eitz Hadar. So the Chazal say Pri Eitz Hadar means a beautiful fruit, but I think a cherry is nice. And watermelon is also pretty charming. And an apple is a nice fruit. I mean, there's so many. A plum is a beautiful fruit. There's felto is beautiful fruits. Why did we decide it's a citrus? So Chazal say in Masechta Sukkah that in a Sefer Torah there are no nekudos, there are no vowels. Pri Eitz Hadar can also be read Pri Eitz Hadar. It's a fruit that lives. Hadar be'ilanai mishana l'shana. It lives on the tree from year to year. All other fruits have seasons when they thrive and grow. But when that season comes to an end, the fruit is ripe. Either it releases its grip so you can tear it off, it falls off on its own because it's heavy, or it decomposes, it starts decomposing. You can't leave it on the tree after the season. It's ripe, it's time to come off. The exception to that is an esrog. An esrog will remain on the tree throughout all of the seasons. Winter and fall and spring and summer and autumn. And not only does it live through all the seasons, it grows from all the seasons, which is why you can have a very small esrog and you can have a jumbo 747 esrog. Some esrogim can remain on a tree for a few years. Pre-Eitz Hadar. It lives on the tree. It's like it becomes comfortable in the tree. You don't leave your house in the summer or in the winter. The tree becomes its home. Why is that the first fruit to generate joy? Because the first prerequisite for a life of inner wholesomeness and joy is to understand that life takes you through many seasons. Sometimes it's cold outside, and sometimes it's hot outside. Sometimes it's very hot, and sometimes it's very cold. I know there are those who escape to Miami or Los Angeles to avoid the seasons. But those who love the diversity of the seasons, and as the leaves change their colors during those transitional seasons, understand that life by definition is filled with many different seasons, many different climates, many different periods in your life, some colder and some hotter, some rainy and sunshine. And yet, to be an esrog means you don't only learn to endure all the seasons, but you learn to grow from all the seasons, to be enlarged by the seasons, to allow each season to contribute to your growth. And that's the uniqueness of an esrog. Most fruits do not do that. Most fruits look at a certain season that doesn't belong to them and they say, that's it, there's nothing you can do for me anymore. And the season says, there's nothing I can do for you. Have a good day. It's time to leave my tree, and you fall off your tree. Or you just like rot away on the tree, and you could see that. An esrog looks at every season and says, there is something I could learn from you. There's something that you can give me. That's the first fruit that is related to simcha. Usmachtem lefnei Hashem Elokeichem. There is the lulav, the hadas, the arava. We have to wait for sukkahs for that. We're not talking about that. I want to bring out this point. The ability to be able to see that often cannot come in middle of the journey, in middle of the season. I have to be able to revisit later. This is how the Chassam Sofer, Rabbeinu Moshe Sofer, Rabbi Moshe Schreiber, the famous Rav of Preshburg, who passed away in 1839, explains that famous verse where God, Hashem tells Moshe, V'ra'isa es achorai, ufanai lo yeira'u. You're going to see my back. You will not see my face. What does that mean? Why can you see God's back and not his face? And the Chassam Sofer says that Hashem was telling Moshe something very deep. In life, you will often not have the ability to see me in front of you, only in back of you. You won't see my face, you'll see my back, which means life often can't be appreciated in foresight, only in hindsight. Because as I'm living my life, curveballs come my way. Curveballs come into every person's life. And one often becomes clueless. Why should this be part of my journey? Why do I have to confront this curveball? And if you have an easy answer for that, you're probably not experiencing what you're experiencing. People who have just easy answers to dismiss every curveball are usually trying to go into a protective mode, which we call denial or detachment, because I'm actually not allowing myself to experience what I'm experiencing in life. If I allow that curveball to hit me, it hurts. And sometimes it hurts badly. And I'm left with that question, why is this part of my journey? And the Chassam Sofer says, God tells Moshe, don't feel the need to master me on that level. Don't feel the need to have full control and understanding. You don't need to wrap your brain around every experience and event in your life, in your marriage, in your children's life, in your grandchildren's life, in your circumstances around you, in things that you experienced, sometimes even in the past, even sometimes years later. I may not always be able to wrap my brain around it and feel that I own it, I have it, I understand it. We sometimes feel the need to understand things as a form of control. If I understand you, I can control you. If I understand it, I can control it. Somehow I can make sure it doesn't get out of hand. But very often what that just does is it causes yet deeper frustration, as it causes deeper alienation and deeper denial. The Chassam Sofer says sometimes, not always, you can turn around. you can turn around backwards, not frontwards. Afterwards, I can turn around when it's behind me. And sometimes I could say, this encampment was an important stepping stone in my narrative. There was a famous businessman who once said that in the world of business, the rear view mirror is always clearer than the windshield. It's true about life. The rear view mirror gives you perspective that the windshield will often not give. If somebody goes to a personal trainer, for example, to exercise their body, or somebody goes to a psychologist to exercise or reshape their psyche. So every successful step will require sweat, quite literally, in the first metaphor and in the second metaphor conceptually. In the middle of my labor, I'm not going to know the end result, nor will I feel it. What I feel in the middle of my labor is the perspiration, the sweat, a certain sense of agony. Person lifts weights, they're tearing their tissue, and that causes pain. When you're done with the journey, and you look back maybe 5 years later or 10 years later, you can look back in the rear view mirror of your life. And mentally, you can revisit every place that you were once in. And this time, I may not be able to change the facts, but I can see it in a different context. I can see it as an indispensable part of getting me to my destination. So I could look back at the very experience which caused me such headache and see it as a stepping stone towards liberation and awareness. I once read a line from somebody. He said, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect the dots looking backwards. Essentially, that's how the Chassam Sofer sees that pasuk. Connecting the dots means finding the oneness, the purpose, finding God in life, finding the aleph, the achdus, the cohesiveness. I can't connect the dots always looking forward. I can trust, I can hold on to a conviction, to a faith, but I can't always connect it looking forward. I could often connect it looking backwards. And the trust that the dots will connect in the future is what I have to hold on to. The trust that as I'm going through this journey, the child is not alone. His father is with him or with her. That allows me to know that the dots will connect, even if I can't see how all these 42 journeys are getting me to where they are supposed to. I can't always see the path. It's very winding. And when you're going in a straight path, you could see the end. When you're going in a winding path, you can't. But I have to be able to know that there is a path. How do I know there is a path? Because my hand is being held by my Father, who says, come, let's walk through this path. One day I'll be able to look back and say, wow, what an interesting path. What a creative path. What a fantastic, fantastic path. This journey through this desert requires 3 conditions to create it. The journey from Egypt to our promised land, with all of its challenges that we mentioned, always requires 3 conditions. It's called sleeping, cooling off, and getting a headache. What are these 3 conditions? The Arizal, the great Jewish mystic, the Kabbalist, the Arizal, Rabbeinu Yitzchak Luria, teaches that the act of creation had to be preceded by another act called tzimtzum. Tzimtzum is not a Chinese dish. It's a term in Yiddishkeit, tzadik mem, tzadik vav mem, or tzimtzum, T-Z-I-M-T-Z-U-M. And it basically means concealment or contraction or restriction or compression or withdrawal. And what the Arizal postulated was something very fascinating, and that is, God is infinite, Ein Sof. If God is infinite, there's no room for anything outside of infinity, because infinity means it's everything and everywhere. So how can there be room for you and I and the world? If Hashem is infinite, Ein Sof is not limited. So if it's not limited, there's no place and there's no concept, physical or spiritual, that is not filled with infinity. So how do I exist? How do you exist? That's why creation had to be preceded by this phenomenon called tzimtzum. Tzimtzum is that the Ein Sof, infinity, created a void. He created, so to speak, what the Arizal calls a chalal, a vacuum, a makom panoi, a space that in its perception is devoid of the manifest infinity of the divine. Because if that void would have not been created, there could be nothing else outside of him. As the pasuk says, Ein oid mulvadai. There's nothing outside of him. Everything is him. So there's nothing else. What the tzimtzum achieved is God, so to speak, withdrew his infinite presence, creating, as it were, a space, a vacuum, that in a revealed way is devoid of that Ein Sof, of that infinite manifestation of light. And in that empty space, all of creation came into existence. It's in that vacuum that all of existence emerges. Because it's in that vacuum that a world can be formed, that a human being or any creature can come into existence and feel the sense of I. How can I feel my I? Because there was a tzimtzum. If there was no tzimtzum, if the doors of perception were cleansed, and there would be no withdrawal of the infinite light, no concealment of the infinite light, everything would appear as is, infinite. Just an expression of pure infinity of Hashem. What allows there to be a sense of otherness, a sense of separateness, is this reality of tzimtzum, this primordial contraction, kivayachal, that Hashem suspends his infinity, creating an empty space where that infinity is not presently revealed. And it's in this consciousness that we all come into, which means that the greatest challenge of life is the confrontation of a void. The world, the universe begins with that void, with that chalal, with that emptiness that every person has to face. A void that seems devoid of infinity, even though it's not. But from our experience, from our perception, that is stage number one. Without this tzimtzum, there's no otherness, there's no separateness. If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear as is, which is infinite. This is what creates free choice. This is what creates independence. This is what creates autonomy. This is what creates separateness, otherness. This is what creates a universe in which you could look at God as something separate. Or even a universe where someone can walk around and define themselves as an atheist or an agnostic because of this tzimtzum, because of this void that Hashem created and allowed as the genesis of existence. And this tzimtzum we all have to create when we enter into relationships. When you want to create a new life for yourself and a relationship with somebody, you also have to have a tzimtzum. That's the secret why, under a chuppah, how do a chassan and kala enter into the covenant of marriage? He places a ring on her finger. What's the secret of a ring? If you look at the physical, graphic reality of a ring, it's essentially a metaphor for tzimtzum. Because when God withdraws his infinite light, he creates an empty space. and the light encircles the empty space. When somebody wants to enter into a marriage, the first step is tzimtzum. If I can't create an empty space where my ego is not present, then I can't be in a relationship with somebody else. The first prerequisite for a relationship is I withdraw my presence from a particular space and I say, here I will allow you to enter into my life, or allow this person to enter into my life. But if I fill my entire presence, there's no room for anybody else, I can't have a relationship. So the first step for a relationship is creating space for something outside of you. Creating space for your opinions, creating space for your feelings, creating space for your journey, creating space for your character, creating space for another person. When somebody cannot do that tzimtzum, then they can't be in a relationship with somebody, because there is only I. So tzimtzum is the necessary prerequisite for a relationship with otherness. A space devoid of me where you can exist, and the two can then connect. That's the ring. The ring is the chassan telling the kala, even though he doesn't say it when he gives the ring, but this is the idea behind it, that I have created an empty space in my ego, right? I have created an empty space in my ego where there is now room for you, for your world, for your emotions, for your experiences. It's essentially creating what you would call, the Maharal says that the word for rechem, which is womb, rechem, right, is the same etymology like the word rachem, compassion. What is a womb? A womb is, physically, God gives the woman the ability to create a keli, a place to carry a child. So it's part of the biology that is interwoven into the very fabric of her chemistry. But how is a man supposed to know about this? So that's why he has a special mitzvah, pru. It's interesting, the mitzvah to have children is not on a woman, it's on a man. Why? Isn't that funny? The Gemara says, and this is the halach in Shulchan Aruch, a man is obligated to have children. A woman is not. She doesn't have the mitzvah pru. The answer, of course, is a mitzvah means a commandment. I don't command you to breathe. Why don't I command you to breathe? Because it's essential. It's organic. For a woman, having children is organic. It's natural. Literally, every month she's preparing to have a child. So you don't have to command her. For a man, it's like not a mitzvah. It's not alien to her. This is her very essence. By a man, it's like a chiddush. It's a mitzvah. God says, hey, get out of your cave. It's time to take care of your children. It's time to have a child. So that's the ring. The ring begins before children, that there is a relationship, there's a space that I create for you. Where does this come? It comes from God's tzimtzum. Hashem created the world because he wanted to get married. If we wish, we could say God was a perfect bachelor before the world. He had everything, like perfect bachelors think they have everything, right? They're handsome, they're rich, they got everything. The only thing a perfect bachelor is lacking is a wife. Somehow you can get married to yourself, even if you're a perfect bachelor. At least according to the present standards of the Supreme Court, you cannot get married to yourself. You still need another person for marriage, okay? I know one day somebody will appeal that and say, why not? I want to get married to myself. I am a split personality. I have a lot of conflicts in me. I want to marry myself, and it won't be easy, trust me. Why can't I get a tax discount? But according to the present definition of marriage, marriage means with someone else, not you. The perfect bachelor is perfect, but he's lacking a relationship with somebody outside of him. Kevayachal, it's just a cute little imperfect metaphor. God is really perfect. What does perfection lack? Nothing. How could it lack something? If it lacks, it's not perfect. But one thing it lacks, it lacks imperfection. Perfection lacks imperfection. When I'm perfect, there's no room for a relationship. I'm perfect. Like we spoke last week, Parshas Pinchas, I have no needs. If I have no needs, there's no relationship. God wanted to, so to speak, become imperfect. That's the tzimtzum. The tzimtzum is, I shrink my infinite essence, to create room for you. for another person, for a person. So now we could connect. It could be a relationship. So God created the world in order to get married. He wanted marriage. He wanted a relationship. The first thing, you need a tzimtzum. That's the first thing every relationship needs. You need a tzimtzum. If you're not ready to make a tzimtzum, if you're not ready to really create space for the other, you're not ready for a real relationship. There's a t-shirt that reads, I'm very easy to get along with once you learn to worship me. Of course, if you learn to worship me, I'm very easy to get along. What if you don't learn to worship me? Can we get along? If there's no tzimtzum, I cannot really be in a relationship. Everything is on my terms. As long as you're an extension of me, as long as you agree with me, as long as you think like me, then we're good. If not, conflict, contention. But that's not a relationship. Relationship is loy toiv heyos ha'adam levadai. It's not good for Adam to be levadai. So the Baal HaTanya says ha'adam always refers not only to the person down here. Ha'adam refers to the Adam ha'elyon in Yecheskel, Hashem. Hashem is levadai. He's alone. Ein oid mil vadai. He's the ultimate levadai. Loi toiv heyos ha'adam levadai. God says, I don't want to be alone. Es eloi ezer, I want help. Kenegdai. What's kenegdai? Kenegdai means from the opposition. How could somebody help you if they're opposed to you? But that's how marriage is described. Now, some couples are mahader in the kenegdai. They're mamish mahader in the kenegdai. But the point is, even in the greatest marriages, most beautiful marriage, there's always a kenegdai. Kenegdai means you become the help of another person, not by always agreeing with them, but by being different. If you're like me, I don't need you. The reason I need you and you need me is because you can broaden my horizons. I can broaden your horizons. If you just fit into my expectations and my ego, I'm not growing. I just remain the same stuck person. The relationship is with somebody who's kenegdai, who has a different perspective, who has a different way of looking at it, who has a different personality. And then I could become larger than myself. I can broaden my horizons. The reason it's that way here on earth is because that's the purpose of creation. Eseloi ezer kenegdai, Hashem said, I want an ezer. Kenegdai, but for this we need somebody else. How can there be somebody else? Levadai, einoid milvadai. He said, Loi toive yos adam levadai. That's the first step. It's called the step of tzimtzum. But on the other hand, the tzimtzum can't be where it ends. If God just removes himself, so what are we left with? We're left with a dark world. If the tzimtzum is where it ends, there's no relationship. God is God, and I am I, and we don't meet. God creates an empty space. His Ein Sof is completely concealed and withdrawn. And that's what it is. So we are left in a place of a void, in a place of a darkness, in an empty world, in a desert, literally a desert. Which is why the tzimtzum, the Arizal says, must be mitigated with a glow of the divine light that empowers us to overcome the darkness. Meaning, following the tzimtzum, the Arizal says God communicated into the world, into the empty space, what's called a kav, a thread, a chut, a line, a faint divine glow, which ultimately gives vitality and energy to all of consciousness. So even though godliness is concealed in our world, which is what allows us to experience ourselves, underlying every reality, there is divine light, not just divine darkness. So it allows me to connect with the divine essence within the tzimtzum. Just like in a relationship. If I say to you, okay, you have all the space you want in the world. I'm going to Hawaii. Wonderful, but there's no relationship. The point is not that there's an empty space and the husband or the wife leave and now you have all independence. The point is interdependence. There is codependence, there is independence, and then there is interdependence. Interdependence means that within every person's space, they could then reach out to create a relationship. I could find the you in the I, and you could find the I in the you. So there is what's called interdependence. And the same is true in the purpose of creation, and that's why it's down here like that, because it's in the purpose that way. That the tzimtzum doesn't just end. God says, okay, I withdraw my infinity. There is now a void, emptiness. I'm not here. Everywhere the world can exist. God now communicates a light, an energy, to be able to give hope to the world. The world is not just a place of emptiness and darkness. It's a dark world where you can find light. It's a dark world where you can excavate and uncover light. I once heard an expression from Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz. He said, we are living in the worst of all possible worlds, but where there's still hope. Our world is called Tachton Shein Tachton Lamata Himenu. It's the lowest of all possible worlds. Can't get lower. But where there's still hope. There's hope for renewal. There's hope for redemption. Evil can be conquered. Darkness can be overcome. Challenges can be dealt with. So these are the two conditions. There's the tzimtzum, and then there is the divine light that allows us to overcome the tzimtzum, to heal the tzimtzum, to create a relationship from a place of choice, from a place of separateness. Not from a place where there's no I. The tzimtzum allows for an I, but with the I to be able to discover that beneath the I there is infinity. That's a relationship called Ezer Kenegdei, a relationship by choice. In fact, it happens also with Adam and Chava themselves. Adam and Chava were created as Siamese twins. That's what the Gemara says. Siamese twins are connected, they're one, but they're not facing each other. Adam and Chava could not be separated. They were one, literally one by the hips, but they could not see each other. Now, there's an advantage in such marriages. You always know where your husband is. You never have to text him. When are you coming home? You said 3 minutes. Another advantage is when you're washing the dishes, he has to stay in the kitchen. He can't just run to the couch and start texting. Yeah, that's why you have two sinks, fleishiks, milchiks, parallel each other. You wash this side, he washes that side. It seemed like a great arrangement for Adam and Chava. Adam can't run to a kiddush, a shir, ma'ariv, a simcha, a farbrengen, a pidyon aben, another shir, another event, a chasana, 9 chasanas he has. Nah, where you are, he is. What did Ruth say? Where you go, I go. They don't have a choice. There's only one issue. Adam and Chava could never see each other. What that means spiritually is, there are Siamese twins physically, there are Siamese twins spiritually. There are people who are connected by force, by nature, but they don't see each other. I don't see you, you don't see me. There's no respect for your individuality because we're just one, this is who we are. So they also had to go through this separation, which is called a tzimtzum. A separation, there's an emptiness. And now Chava can run. And Adam can run. Now they actually have to choose each other. And when they choose each other, they can look at each other face to face. Because that's the rule of the game. When you choose each other, you could see each other. When you're forced to be together, you're always together, but you never see each other. And sometimes relationships have to go through this process. You're together, it's just the way it is, and there comes a point where you have to be able to see each other. I should be able to see you. You should be able to see me. That's a very intense, transformative process. And that means that there's a certain separation. Back to the famous line of the Kotzker Rebbe, which I told you many times. Ich bin nicht, weil du bist du, und du bist du, weil ich bin nicht dich, und du bist nicht du. Ich bin nicht, weil ich bin ich, und du bist du, weil du bist du, bin ich, und du bist du. Anybody wants to translate? If I am I because you are you because I am I am not I and you are not you, but if I am I because I am I and you are you because you are you, then I am I and you are you. That ability to be able to say there is I is also the ability for me to say there is you, and conversely. And that allows for them to see each other, to come back into a space where they connect, but from a place of initiative, from a place of creativity, from a place of choice. This is the maturity of Ezer Kenegdai, because there was a separation to allow for a deeper type of unity. And this ability of a person to be able to live in a world of tzimtzum, to be able to live in a world where there is separateness. That's not a mistake. Sometimes people are living in a place, there is darkness, there's separateness, there's a void. Welcome to the world. That's the plan. Tzimtzum was not a mistake. Life, there's a lot of trauma that people go through in life. But here's the secret. The greatest trauma that even the greatest tzaddik and the most perfect life has to confront is everybody has to confront the trauma of the tzimtzum. Now you might think, oh, that's trauma. Let me tell you, that trauma is the source of all traumas. All traumas in life are rooted in one trauma of the tzimtzum. That's the first void. What is trauma? Trauma is you're left alone, you're lonely. It's trauma. You have no one to hold on to. There's no trust. That's why trauma creates isolation. That's why trauma creates detachment. That's why trauma creates tremendous alienation. You enter into the solitary confinement because there was betrayal or trauma. What is the source of that? The tzimtzum, the first tzimtzum. And everyone faces that. And when you can face that trauma, you can face every other trauma. Because that's the source of all of it. The ability to be able to say that I believe in the sun even when it's not shining. And I believe in love even when I don't feel it. And I believe in God even when He's silent. That ability is facing the tzimtzum and knowing that under the darkness, above the clouds, the sun is shining, even though there are clouds. But then comes step 3. And step 3 is what happens as an aftermath of the tzimtzum, which is absolute confusion. And worse than confusion, where a person can look at something that is not good, something that's useless, purposeless, vain, and even immoral, but it has an illusion of worthiness, of desirability. This is what we call temptation, the powers of addiction and temptation, where things lie to us, where what is really horrible suddenly becomes meaningful. That's a perception where my mind is playing games with me. I don't see truth anymore. I see falsehood. If I would look at the world and see that it's a vacuum, that would already be part of the remedy. Yediyas hamacha lechatzi trupa. Half of the remedy is knowing the illness. The problem is I turn the vacuum into a blessing. I turn darkness into light. They say there was once a group of Hasidim who were farbrengen, and there was no wine. So the host told one of his friends, go down to the wine cellar, and bring up a bottle of wine. So he goes down to the wine cellar, and he screams, and he says, it's pitch dark, I can't see anything. So the host says, don't worry. Stand there for 5 minutes, and you'll get used to the darkness. You'll get used to the darkness, and you'll be able to see your way. And he screams back up, he says, that's exactly what I'm afraid of. That's exactly what I'm afraid of. The fact that I can identify that it's dark, it's a tzimtzum. When the darkness is not dark anymore. V'hanoichi haster aster ponei b'yayim ahu. Says the Baal Shem Tov, God doesn't say, I'll conceal my face. So you'll conceal your face. I will conceal the concealment. Haster aster. I will conceal the concealment. It's not concealment anymore. Suddenly I'm an addict, and I call myself blessed. I'm miserable, and I call myself happy. I'm living in denial, and I think I'm authentic. I'm completely detached from everybody and everything, but the darkness is so deep that it appears as light. That's a different level. That's where falsehood becomes truth, and darkness becomes light. There's an expression of the Navi Yeshaya, or Yirmiyahu, Samim choshech la'or. They transform darkness and they call it light. Poison is called healthiness. And dysfunction is called Yiddishkeit. And stupidity is called wisdom. And narcissism and egotism and hate is camouflaged as a religious divine experience. Ooh, now you have a problem. If I'm struggling with something, I'm struggling with it. Struggle with it. But suddenly I can't struggle with it anymore. So now the struggle becomes the blessing. Oh, now my mind is playing so much games. This is where a person really needs healing. And if you just realize these 3 steps are described in such succinct terms by our sages when they describe the long journey from Egypt to the promised land. Here we slept, here we were cooled, and here you started to get your headaches. When a person sleeps, the Gemara says it's echad meshishim b'missa. Sleep is a 60th of death. Sleep is a form of withdrawal. When we sleep, our energy retreats. It becomes concealed. When you're asleep, you're present physically, but you're not fully present. When I'm asleep, you can behave in my presence as though I'm not here. I'm here, but I'm asleep. Everybody knows when mommy goes to sleep, right? Seret Lebedik in Shtetl. In camp, yeah? We waited till our counselors fell asleep, and then the water fights began in the middle of the night. Why? You could be here, but if you're asleep, it's as though you're not here. This is tzimtzum. This is the first thing. Here we slept. We slept represents the ability of the concealment, the withdrawal of energy that allows there to be a presence of a void, of a vacuum. God is here. But from my perspective, I don't necessarily see it. I don't necessarily feel it. But then there is the flow of light that mitigates the tzimtzum. It cools off the fires, the scorching heat that's created by the tzimtzum. The ability to be, so to speak, burnt by it. The gvura of the tzimtzum. The heat, the withdrawal of the tzimtzum is cooled off by the second stage, by the light that pervades it. That's the second thing. And then there is the third thing. Kan chashashta es reishecha. Here, your head began to hurt. This is the third thing that happens in our world. The many contortions, paradoxes, contradictions, uncertainties that cloud our minds, confuse our priorities, cause us to create a distorted vision of reality, misguided decisions, miscalculations. Basically, it's not just a physical headache. When I have a headache, I can't think straight. My mind plays games. The unhealthy becomes healthy. This is the third reality that causes the journey of life to be a journey through a desert. These are the 3 conditions that make every journey challenging, difficult, painful, but also rewarding, meaningful, and full of incredible potential. In this world, we slumber. We have headaches. That's the journey of this world. But we always have a glimmer of light. We always have clouds of glory to be able to cool off the fires of purgatory with everything that purgatory represents. Mark Twain was a very famous American writer. He once said very cynically, he said, "Go to heaven for the climate. Go to hell for the company." And what he meant was, he was onto something. Our world has a lot of company. You got a lot of company, but it's sometimes a challenging place. It's a place that was born in divine absence, tzimtzum, rather than divine expression. But it is not all darkness. There's always a ray of light that we can cultivate, that we can discover. And the ultimate purpose is to bring back the original light. But this time it's within the world, not outside of the world. So the ultimate world of redemption is the world where the post-tzimtzum reality becomes one with the pre-tzimtzum reality, where there's the complete unity of the infinite and the finite, but not in a way that anyone has to be compromised. It's where the marriage happens by choice, but v'hayu lebasar echad, they become one flesh. That is the journey from birth to the promised land. And as I'm going through the journey, I'm often seeing one struggle and another struggle, and now I have this to deal with, and this emotion, and this challenge. But God says, I want you to be able to stop and look back and go back to every journey. And then you'll be able to see, number one, I was with you. I was with you. And you'll be able to understand, here we slept. Here we cooled off. There is number three. Here you got a headache. Your mind played games with you. This is where human choice takes on an extreme, and that's why it becomes you. And yet, I want you to understand that every one of these steps was part of your journey. The sleeping, the cooling off, the headaches were all part of your journey. Journey towards where? A journey towards healing. There is always a journey towards healing. And now as we're going back, we finished the healing. I want you to be able to go back to every place and see this was an indispensable part of your journey. So you'll say, but how could it be? This was sleep. This was slumber. My energy was so weak. My head was killing. I had a headache. I was with you on that journey. That journey was an indispensable part of your growth. But now I want you to come back. Go back. Revisit it. And look at it for what it really, really was. What was it? It was the exclusive path that you had to create in the journey from diversity to oneness. So it allows you that even during those journeys to be able to appreciate that you should never despair. You should never become hopeless. You should never give up on yourself. Always realize that there is a path that you're creating right now from the very notes that were given to you. The very notes that were given to you are the notes from which you create your symphony. Don't think my notes are cursed. I was forgotten. My path is no path. I'm just in an endless wilderness that has no destination. That's the point of this recounting. The point is, every journey had a destination. Every journey was part of the destination. Every journey, even if it looked like you slept through that whole journey, you were just asleep on the plane. Or you just had a headache, you were taking Tylenols. All you were doing, from a spiritual and emotional point of view, that was also part of the journey. It was the unique path. Therefore, as you are in that journey, treat it with respect. Treat it with dignity. Don't run from it. Because this is the path that you're paving from Mitzrayim all the way to the promised land. Have a wonderful week. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
All your sources today. I mean, as always, but the Tanya,
Thank you.
Thanks. I just want to tell you, it's so interesting what you said at the end about something about the path and it leads you on to better things. Sometimes, every night I say this thing. You ever see the Tefillah Todah? You ever see it?
So, yeah.
It's so beautiful. My friend introduced me to it. I've been saying it for years, every night.
Yes, I know it.
But all the journeys.
Yes.